Bill Belichick called him the best pure passer he's ever seen. Burt Jones had it all: a cannon for an arm, pinpoint accuracy, and a fearlessness that made him a nightmare for defenses. Jones had all the tools to be a Hall of Famer, but injuries had other plans. So how did one of the most talented quarterbacks the NFL has ever seen go from MVP to one of football's greatest what-ifs? Burt Jones was eating, breathing, living football from birth. His dad, Dub Jones, was an excellent player and spent much of his career with the Cleveland Browns under Paul Brown. So Burt Jones spent countless summers at Brown's training camps as a ball boy. Now obviously being around such a great team, the coaches, the players, would help, but what really set him apart was his insane arm talent. Reportedly able to throw the ball almost 100 yards. He had an extremely flexible arm with pinpoint accuracy. He was powerful, smart, thrived under pressure, and was an excellent leader. He was also a great runner. On top of all that, he was mentally tough as nails. But as we'll see later, that mentality was actually part of his downfall. If you're drafting up the perfect quarterback, Burt Jones had it all. Nicknamed the Ruston Rifle, he'd take his arm talent to LSU and beyond. Although Jones only started 2 games by his junior year, he'd go on to play every game after. In 1971, he was named the MVP of the Sun Bowl, where he threw a then school record longest pass for 77 yards. He became LSU's first consensus All-American quarterback in 1972, as he threw for a then school record 1,446 yards and 14 touchdowns, finishing with a 9-2-1 record, as well as being named the National Player of the Year, and also finished number 1 all-time in passing yards, attempts, completions, and touchdowns at LSU. Jones was killing it, so the Baltimore Colts had to get him. They made a trade with the New Orleans Saints to acquire the 2nd overall pick in the 1973 draft, and the Colts would select Jones. Now it's pretty hard to follow in the footsteps of Johnny Unitas, but Burt Jones would prove to be a great successor. Now 1973 would feature your typical growing pains of a rookie quarterback. He only started 5 games, and 1974 would be more of the same. You'd think after Johnny Unitas and other legends had gone, the Colts were going to go into rebuild mode, given they'd only won 6 games in Jones's first 2 years. But Burt had other plans.
At the beginning of this season, they lost 4 out of their first 5 games. Then they suddenly caught fire and burned through the league with 9 consecutive victories and won first place in the Eastern Division of the AFC.
So yeah, as he said, they got red hot in 1975 and won 9 straight to secure their first of 3 consecutive AFC East titles. They shot up from 13.6 points a game, the 4th worst in the league, to 28.2 points per game, the 2nd best. Burt Jones was now the full-time starter, and the arrival of new head coach Ted Marchibroda certainly helped. He led the league in lowest interception rate and completed 59% of his passes. He threw 59 touchdowns to just 28 interceptions from 1975 to 1977. In that same stretch, he led the Colts to a 31-11 record. Compare that to the Colts' 11-31 record the previous 3 seasons. So in just his 3rd season, Jones had helped the Colts go from one of the worst teams in the league to one of the best. And with him at the helm, anything seemed possible. You always felt the Colts had a chance. 1976 would be his best, as he'd go on to win MVP. He led the league in passing yards with over 3,000, the only quarterback to throw over 3,000 that year. He also threw 24 touchdowns to only 9 interceptions, and the Colts finished with an 11-3 record with the top-rated offense in the league. Jones would also finish with a passer rating of 102.5. There were only 3 quarterbacks to achieve a 100-plus passer rating during the entire decade of the 1970s. The other 2, Roger Staubach and Ken Stabler, who did it the same year. In Joe Namath's own words, "If you asked me to pick the number 1 quarterback in the league, I'd pick Burt Jones. Who else?" But despite this regular season success, the Colts had an insurmountable obstacle ahead of them each year in the playoffs. Having lost to the Steelers in 1975, they'd face them again in 1976. On this occasion, the Colts were held to just 170 yards of total offense versus the Steelers' 526 yards, and Jones only threw 144 yards, a touchdown, and 2 interceptions. The silver lining to this blowout, which the Steelers won 40-14, was that a plane crashed into Memorial Stadium's upper deck just after the game finished. But because this was such a blowout, fans had already started leaving, so that part of the stadium was essentially empty and nobody suffered any major injuries. The Colts went 10-4 in 1977, and they'd face the Raiders in the divisional round. They'd lose in the infamous goes to the post game, up 31-28 with less than 3 minutes to play. Stabler found Casper to set up the game-tying field goal. Then, after a scoreless OT, Stabler connected with Casper again for a 10-yard touchdown to end the game 37-31. Despite the heartbreaking loss, people were optimistic for the 1978 season.
The pride of Colt football will be an NFL force to be reckoned with for years to come.
Oh, if only. In a preseason game that year, Jones separated his shoulder, and he'd go on to start just 7 games from 1978 to 1979. So unfortunately, despite being this generational talent, his career was so short, only 3 years of dominance. And as I alluded to earlier, one of his greatest attributes, his mentality, would play a role in the end of his career.
They paid me to play, and I was going to play until I couldn't play.
He never got surgery, although that wasn't his decision, he was just never advised to, and he kept trying to come back too early, and he would just re-injure his shoulder. In his own words, I probably should have just sat out that first season and let it heal. Maybe if he got the proper rest, he would have been okay, but who really knows? All we can say is injuries derailed what looked to be a long and prosperous football career. Given he's just one of only 2 quarterbacks in NFL history to win an MVP and appear in only 1 Pro Bowl, speaks to the shortened career that he had. Entering a new decade, Jones had recovered, and he threw for a career-high 3,134 yards in 1980, but his touchdown to interception ratio was about equal, and he was clearly not the same player. Also, by then, the Colts were pretty bad. They didn't really have any weapons, and their defense sucked. In 1980, they were a bottom 5 defense, and in 1981, they had the worst defense in the league, giving up 33.3 points per game. Jones did throw for over 3,000 yards in 1981, but the Colts went 2-12. But by this point, things were getting really messy in Baltimore, with owner Robert Irsay calling the plays. Jones would say, Irsay couldn't have told you how many players there were on the field, never mind what plays we had. All he was trying to do was embarrass the coaches and the players. When he told me to run, I threw. When he told me to throw left, I ran right. After a contract dispute in 1982, Jones was able to get out of Baltimore and was traded to the Rams. However, Jones would be forced to retire only a few games into the next season after suffering a serious neck injury. That being said, Jones still had it. Competing in the NFL Quarterback Challenge almost a decade after retirement, he finished first in the retiree category and third amongst all competitors. That prompted the Chargers general manager to get the 39-year-old Jones to make a return. But as cool as that may have been, following the advice of his doctors, he opted not to make a comeback.